What's up? Think International. Jeff Moore's here at North Coast Church in the Edge venue, and we're about to sit down with two of the most creative leaders on the entire West Coast, Larry Osborne and Chris Brown. Let's go. So, North Coast Church has 4 senior pastors. How did that start, and how does that work?
We're not sure how it works sometimes.
We'll tell you in a year or two.
Yeah.
So far, pretty good.
Yeah.
But you got the beginning of it. It was your genius.
Yeah, it really goes back to trying to figure out how you could honor people that were in an associate role. The idea of associate pastor is a great title, but it usually means too young to have your own church or you don't have the gifts. So people are always saying, when are you going to get your own? When are you going to get your own? So I just, frankly, long ago took a page out of the business world where you have what's called a sole proprietorship, which is what a lot of churches are, an owner with valued employees, or you have partnerships. And there might be a managing partner, a founding partner, but there's all the difference in the world between being one of the partners and being a highly valued employee. So it's terminology that confuses the church world, the business world, and the secular people I explain to, they get it like that.
Yeah, they get it.
I tell you, this is going to sound incredibly arrogant on my end, but a little over 8 years ago, when Larry and Charlie were talking to me about coming on staff, if it would have been an associate pastor role or a director role or something like that, I wouldn't have been interested. At that time, I was looking at really saying, okay, I've done some significant ministry and been in places, and they were opening for, teaching pastors or senior pastors or lead pastor. And if in a traditional church model of North Coast, I would have been number 3 or 4 on a depth chart and associate pastor. And it's funny looking back how much of that influence was there.
One thing I notice is people always introduce themselves, I'm one of the senior pastors. Right away that began to happen when people introduce themselves, because there's power in titles and not inappropriate. There's an understanding of your role, and that's important.
So from the standpoint of, people could say there's a real danger in it becoming a 4-headed beast where there's, people want to take it 4 different directions. How does that not happen?
Well, first of all, think of any healthy partnership. You're still heading in one direction, and you're playing off one another with some collaboration, some ideas. You're submitting to one another. There's different roles, but it only would become a 4-headed monster if you brought in 4 people who were going to each be trying to figure out where we're headed. But when you're already headed somewhere, or maybe in a church plant, they kind of move that direction early on, you've already shared the same vision. I just don't see much of a problem with that.
We see most of this as creating a spot at the table for people that are already in your organization, that if you don't create a spot at the upper level, they're going to bail or they're going to fly. And so it's really bringing people that are already in the same DNA, on the same page as you, to say, man, instead of you going to plant a church, taking another church, stay here. We're going to give you the title and just keep running this thing.
Don't think of co-pastors, because you can't have 2 tigers on the same hill.
Sure.
But most ministries have multiple hills. You can put a tiger here, a tiger there. And that title gives them authority. It gives them a lot of juice within the organization. It makes a big difference. Yeah. But it's not that we sit around and kind of wrestle for each and every decision. We just say, this one's yours, this one's mine, and we move on from there.
And don't you each kind of share, like have your own piece, but at the same time share?
In our model, we have one of us, the 4 senior pastors, is in charge of pastoral care, shepherding, counseling, member care, and that. The other 3 of us really act as the directional leaders, and each one of us, I have a different area that we're kind of focused on, and there's 2 of us, so we split the finances up. Larry and Charlie are going to run with the finance and administration piece. The staffing part is going to be Charlie and I are going to run on that piece more often. And then when it comes to the teaching and leadership, kind of church where we're going, Larry and I are on that. So we, it's not like everyone's fighting for the same piece of the pie either. We all have different pieces that we run with. And I tell you, what happens is, as churches continue to grow larger and larger, not one guy is laying awake at night wondering, it all comes down to me, I got all this responsibility. But we've taken the responsibility that usually rests on one pair of shoulders, and we've taken it out to 4 individuals, and it makes life easier.
That's huge, huh? So you don't have the entire weight of the church on your back.
Right, and actually where I think you'd have more problems is if your roles are too tightly defined. Because as you get larger and larger, you not only have different tigers on the hill, but nobody else is allowed to be there. And slowly you can start heading into different directions. And so there's a lot of give and take in the areas, like you said, the staffing, I have give and take there. And there's areas of finance. So Charlie and I focus on that more. You have plenty of say, and at certain times, why are we doing this? How about we consider that? Right. And that keeps everybody moving together in the same direction.
Now, you guys split the teaching. how does that work? I mean, because most of the time people
You should
think.
probably ask the audience.
Yeah, I was going to say,
right.
half the time it's really good. Then you just have to talk to our wives to find out which half.
Who's half. Actually, it works out incredibly well. We'll sit down, and the first thing we'll do with Larry's teaching schedule, his writing schedule, how much he speaks elsewhere, especially to pastors and leaders. I do a lot of teaching that I love to be involved in kingdom-wise. That's more church body, sometimes youth-oriented camps, retreats. And so we'll look at our own schedules. This gives us the freedom to say, well, we can still be involved in ministry outside of our little Sunday school class and still be part of a vibrant, growing church and using our gifts here in a great way.
Yeah, and I would hardly ever recommend to do what Chris and I are doing, frankly, because it's such a unique situation of who I am, who Chris is,
Right.
how long the church has been around. I am a huge fan of shared pulpits. I think in any church, 300-400 or more, if you're going to have any leadership, you're not just going to be the guy in the office studying all day long. You've got to have times, because you can't wake up thinking about two things. You have to have times that are set aside for leadership, so that creates that. But normally, I believe you need an anchor. But when you have someone as gifted as Chris, it was just a matter of, well, if we're really going to win, we've got to learn to share the ball in a different way. Kind of like basketball, say, as a sport, you have certain people that are the go-to players.
Right.
But sometimes on a championship team, there can be 2 or 3 that can take that last second shot. And I believe when you have somebody that good, you're a moron to always take it yourself.
Right.
We kind of always looked and thought it was the failure of the Lakers with Shaq and Kobe. I mean, if they could have shared a team, if they could have shared LA, where that team could have gone, you know,
right.
and neither of them got to where they could have gone together.
Yep.
So you guys can share.
So far.
So far. A little over 8 years.
I've been screaming, give me the ball the last 3 weeks. I think I get it this week.
No, with the way you guys come up with messages is a little bit more unique as far as you give a lot of input to people on staff and teams and whatnot.
You know, I even talked
take
about
that
it this weekend to the rest of our church, because most of them know about it. We've drifted in from time to time, but every Tuesday from 11 to 12, we have a sermon prep class. It's open to anyone on staff. Frankly, it's open to anyone at all. But we usually have about 20 to 25 staff, lay leaders come in, and it can be junior high interns, it's youth staff. We have some of our front desk people that love to be in there, some
Facilities
of our administrators,
team.
facilities
team,
guys.
yeah, sure.
And whoever's teaching that Sunday comes in with their message and just opens it up. We just finished the book of Hosea. I came in on Tuesday and said, here's what I'm getting from Hosea. Here's the passages. Here's the points. Here's what I'm getting from the text and where I want to go with it. I'll do that in anywhere from 4 minutes to 8 minutes and then go, what do you think? And for the next 40 minutes, we get input that we would have never gotten before into, did I hear this right, or what about this? I'll get secondary text or illustrations. Someone will say, did you read the USA Today last week? It was talking about that. I'm like, get it to me. What about this? When Abraham did that, it's a lot like Hosea. And I was like, oh, I wouldn't even have gone there. It's more than anything, it's a way to get your dumb tax paid ahead of time. For most pastors, they get done with the message and people walk up and go, oh, pastor, that was great. If you would have only, and you're like, oh, I wish I would have heard that before. Well, we get to hear it before. And it gives us much more creativity. I get to hear from, the other gender. I get to hear from women about, well, what about this and that? I get to hear from introverts, and I don't think like one. And so I get all that stuff poured in ahead of time. And by the time that class is done, I feel like, man, I can teach that sucker now.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the research side, it maybe gives you a 10% boost. On the preaching side, I think sometimes it's 30%. Because of what Chris said, afterward people come up and ask a question, and you realize, oh, I didn't realize they would take it that way, and you get to change it. Some people are confused. They think of it as collaboration, and it's not. It's research, but might as well do the audience research ahead of time.
Sure.
Because afterward, it's totally Chris's sermon or totally mine. Nobody in that room is feeling like, well, I gave you a great idea, or I suggested you don't go this direction, and you did. Why did you? That takes all the creativity and fire out of a sermon. But to have the opportunity to get feedback on the front end, it's why a lot of us preach a better sermon the second or third time if we have multiple services. This just pushes us further along.
So it sounds like, it totally is. North Coast is really a high input organization. People can come up with ideas.
Our doors are open. Whether they come through it or not is every personality is different, but we've got open doors all the time. You don't have to go through 3 assistants or even 1 assistant to poke your head in our door, and that's very intentional, even the way we build our offices.
That's incredible. Yeah. Giving input to the younger pastors on staff, the younger, not even just pastors, but people on staff. Is that to try to keep your organization younger, or?
Well, I think people learn best in an apprentice model where they're actually doing something and you can speak into it. I also think if things are informal, as leaders, Chris and I have more of an opportunity to learn from them. That when we're in a formal meeting, then people respond differently than in the hallway, where I say, hey, what did you think? I'm going to get a totally different answer, and so is Chris. In those more informal settings, they're much more iron sharpens iron that way.
We intentionally, though, create meetings and space to allow people to know they have a voice in this.
Right.
And not just a voice, but to feel like they're actually sharing in some leadership of this. You know, in a church our size, all of our youth pastors, all of our, leaders are quality, high caliber people. And the worst thing you can do for them, what Larry calls young eagles, is put them in a place where there's such a ceiling above them. And a lot of churches are like that, not even large churches. When I was in small churches where I knew, unless the three guys up there die, no one's ever going to get a say in this. I mean, all the meetings are done behind closed doors, all the decisions come out and we're told, and it's just made very clear by the hierarchy and structure of churches that, hey, you may be a young up-and-coming youth pastor that's, got some giftedness and God's using you, but until there's a couple funerals, you get no say in this organization.
Right.
And North Coast has really tried hard to say, we're going to create times, opportunities, stuff even like the sermon prep stuff, all of our leadership meetings. We're going to create zero-base retreats where we can get, all of our young leaders together and say, but your opinion counts. Because if a guy feels like they actually got their hand on the wheel, they actually have a voice into the cockpit of where this thing's going, they'll stick around for a much longer time.
Yeah.
Chris and I are both youth pastors, and we had very successful youth ministries. So we know what it's like to be succeeding, to everybody patting you on the head, saying, man, you're going to fly really high, but at the same time, they're holding onto your tail so you don't go too high. And so I frankly think that's part of how God prepared us for the roles we're in right now, is to let us have great opportunities in places we both really loved, but at the same time realize, I have more to offer than they're giving me the chance. So we try to crack that door and listen. Nobody does it perfect, but it's a very high value for Chris and for me.
Sure. So you talk about young eagles, and those are high caliber young leaders. So I mean,
not young birds.
Yeah, young birds. Because some people,
there's a difference between young eagles and young roosters.
There you go. Yeah.
A rooster will walk through the yard, make a lot of noise, and pretend like they should rule the hen house and that. But you got people in your organization that you look at and go, if this person left, we would be crushed. And you got people in your organization that love who you are as a leader and what you're doing. And if you just gave, like Larry, he said, I got to give some of my title, I got to give some of my time up, I got to give some of that power, prestige up, but you can keep this person for maybe another 5, 10, 20, 30, maybe indefinitely. And we talk to pastors all the time who are just tired of trying to find, that great number 2, number 3 guy.
Right.
Because they have a youth pastor that can only be there for 5, 6, 8 years, and then they got to fly on their own. And we constantly challenge them. They might not have to go. Give them share your title, share the teaching, they can be there. If they love you and love the church, you're the one that's forcing a young eagle out of the nest, and that's what we try to create.
You have to decide, to use a sports analogy, do you want to win or do you want accolades? And those are different, because to win, you always have to sublimate something about your skill set and your accolades. I guarantee you, I've never seen a winning team in which there weren't some key players who said winning is more important than, and nobody pats you on the back for it. It just happens. And you look in the mirror, sometimes you're disappointed when somebody else gets the top billing or somebody else, not just within your own organization, but even outside, doesn't notice, or you just missed a scoring title.
Yeah.
You won the championship. What do you want?
Exactly.
I'll take championships all day long.
And that's something, the downside, the challenge of the shared leadership, shared title, shared teaching is that you have to give up power and prestige. And both of us do. And yet we're very open with that.
Right.
I would love to have, the Chris Brown temple and, what it looks like if I'm teaching 90% of the time. And there's a human side of you as a teacher and communicator that just, you love the idea that the crowd loves you. And yet there's a side of you for the sake of your family, for the sake of your health, for the sake of the kingdom to go, it's better to do it this way, but I want to have the ball all the time. And I know Larry does too. And so that's where it works in unique settings where someone realizes, this is better for the kingdom, period. It's better for my family. My spouse loves the fact that I'm only on 50% of the time and only 50% of the weekends are gone, especially with smaller kids. But there's a personal side that goes, I got to hear a lot of Larry everywhere I go. I got to live in this guy's shadow for the rest of my life as long as I stay at North Coast.
Right.
And yet there's that side of that going, you know what, though? For the sake of winning team in life, small price to pay.
And it actually goes kind of both ways in the union. There
so.
will always be, there'll always be a sense, because I was here first so many years, that Chris talks about being in my shadow. No matter how high he flies, how great he does, there will always be Larry was here first. The side for the guy who's there first is, it's really cool to be out in the playground picking teams and letting someone else be a captain or whatever. Hey, you be a captain, until like their first pick. It's the old, everybody wants to be a servant leader until they're a servant. So there's different issues. I think the one who comes into this system has to deal with a shadow, and the other person has to deal with the fact that, well, it was okay to like give away some of my stuff, but not when people thought I should. That's a whole different thing. And both, I mean, like, oh, I thought you were going to play. It's like, oh, of course.
Yeah.
That's where the rubber meets the road. But it's the spiritual character we're all called. We preach on it all the time.
Yeah.
Tell our people to be servants. Well, why can't we?
Yeah. With North Coast being such a creative and innovative church, how do you implement ideas around here?
Wow.
How do you implement ideas around here? There is a ton of creativity, and I think our staff knows, and part of it's what we've talked about. Everyone has a place and a right to speak up. We're very much a water cooler organization. Our meetings are going to be about who's the most creative, who do we want in on this, not anything to do with structure.
Sure.
We may have a junior high intern and we may have a high school pastor in on meetings that the student ministries guy that their bosses aren't even in on, because it's like, those two guys think, or that gal thinks the way we want them to think. And so what we try to do around here is get as much buy-in, as much input, as much stuff when it comes to ideas, and then we take it and run with it. It's as far as implementing things, we have a very high speed of implementation around it. Because our staff we're always in change, we're always in flux. As soon as we hear, well, that's not the way we used to do it, well, then we're going to can whatever it is you talked about, because we never want to get stuck in one of those ruts.
Right.
And we'll try a lot of stuff when we use that kind of lingo. The more you have to sell it, the more you have to get everybody on board, the slower the implementation of creativity is, and worse, the harder it is to bail out when a really great idea wasn't such a great idea. I think we have a strong bias to say yes around here. We have a no surprises rule, which helps, because it keeps us from having a lot of stupid things, because sometimes when people are in a creative organization, they think that means do whatever you want. And it doesn't. It means do whatever you're pretty sure will work. Again, switching to a sports analogy.
Sure.
Nobody calls up a player from AA or AAA to the majors if they think they're going to fail. They always call them up because they think this guy's going to make it. But sometimes he doesn't. So we would never innovate or try something that we didn't think had a really good chance of working. And that's why the no surprises rule keeps us from, really, this guy can't hit the curve. There is no way he's ready yet.
Right.
But if we think he can hit the curve, then speed of implementation, and we bring him up and say, we're going to try it. Well, that's a whole different thing than a big ad campaign about our new star player who, in the month of April and May hasn't hit the ball out of the infield.
We try not to implement failure, but we have made it okay to fail around here too.
Yeah.
I mean, and part of that is we've created a culture of creativity and a culture of change. I mean, our whole church could come back next weekend and the buildings could be flipped around. We could have stuff all over the plaza different. And they would just be like, well, that's North Coast. We change.
Right.
We do a lot of creative stuff. Every sermon series, the entire stage flips and changes. And so they're used to that, hey, we're always changing. We're always innovating. We're always going.
Different.
You get into problems of implementing change when your church, your pulpit, your platform hasn't changed in 40 years. And then suddenly they show up and the American flag and the Christian flag are not up on the fourth step, but down on the second, and all hell breaks loose. Well, because you don't have a culture of change. And it's going to take a lot longer, to steer that thing.
Right.
Where us, we can flip things quickly because that's our culture.
Permission versus buy-in.
That's a hobby horse of mine. I write about it in Sticky Teams and some other places. But I think we spend way too much time on buy-in when it comes to innovation. Because if it's truly innovation, people haven't seen it before. Focus groups were totally against microwave ovens. They were totally against minivans. They were against the fax machine. When the iPad came out, think back to all the articles on the front end among very creative people saying, wow, this is their big mistake. The fact of the matter is when we are evaluating something that hasn't yet happened, we evaluate it in light of what has already happened. So like our video venues, everybody thought overflow rooms. Well, of course, they stink, but a video venue didn't stink. And so we more look for yes votes around here. Are there enough yes votes to get it done? And then you don't try to convince the mid adapters, late adapters. Just let them go. Build on the yes votes.
Right.
Now that doesn't work if you're taking one service and saying we're going to go from Bach to rock.
Right.
But you can go from Bach to rock if you count the yes votes of those who want the rock and say we're going to meet over here at another time or in the adjacent gym or whatever it would be. That's much easier. But my goodness, if you have position papers for everything, you're not going to get anything done.
Take forever.
Yeah.
You're a church of 9,000. In the past 2 years, you've grown.
Well, to be honest, we were 50 under this week.
50 under.
There, I'm honest.
I was teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris is on.
8,950.
Yeah, but
Close,
9,000.
close enough,
Yeah,
close
9,000.
So, and over the past 2 years, basically grown by 2,000, yet little to no marketing. No, you don't do any mailers, no big special services. There's no commercial for San Diego County on North Coast Church.
Well, part
How?
of the growth aspect, to be clear, is we moved into a new facility. And
Okay.
so, I mean, that wouldn't happen at the old facility. We, for the last 3 years, we had a bunch of warehouses, just an industrial campus. And we were plugging every seat, every parking space. It was a nightmare. We were busing people in from north and south and other parking lots. I mean, you had to work hard to come to church. So part of the 2,000 growth in a couple of years is we've gotten onto a new campus. I want to make that clear. Otherwise,
Sure.
it sounds like, the supernatural movement.
Right,
But,
right.
it is. It's a word of mouth. That's been in play here at North Coast from the beginning.
Yeah, I've always believed that if you take care of the people you have so well in an environment they know their friends will understand, not even aimed at their friends, because they won't keep coming back if it's aimed at outsiders, has been my experience. So we aim at believers in a way that somebody who's never been in a church understands what we're saying and what we're doing. And they'll bring their friends. I actually think that there's a kind of counterintuitive negative side to special programs because you subliminally teach your people only bring a guest for that special program. And you put on the dog and pony show so they hold back.
Right.
But most people, when they have a friend who's going through trouble, it's a come and see evangelism. They say come and see. So we want to make it so they know any week they bring them, they're going to come and they're going to see. Our messages are fairly in length. They're 50 minutes plus. What do we go, 68 sermons through Luke?
Yeah.
But they are understandable to the brand new person who doesn't know diddly.
Sure.
They can understand what we're saying. And if they're truly seeking and searching, they're going to want to know. They say, tell me. Just tell me in a way that doesn't make me feel stupid.
It's a cover charge mentality that if your program's good enough and what you're offering and really trusting the Spirit to do what the Spirit says, I mean, you're getting people in the Word of God and allowing the Spirit to change lives that are hearing the gospel and the Word of God, then it's worthy of a $20 cover charge. And any place you're going that you're like, we got to get there early, we got to pay a $20 cover, you're going to bring a friend, you're going to tell people about it. And so we market, but we think the absolute best advertisement for Christianity is Christians. Really being Christian.
Kind of market that doesn't cost you any money.
Yeah. And so,
Also, a part of that growth too is when it's word of mouth growth, assimilation is natural. If we have a great marketing campaign, ads, things on everybody's door, what happens is everybody who comes is a stranger.
Right.
And so what you get is these spikes in attendance, but no connection. And one of the very high values around North Coast, we not be a crowd, we be a church. And that is a lot easier to do because if I come on Chris's arm to the meeting, then suddenly he's my John the Baptist, all his friends in the small group, to people. I'm not standing alone wondering why everybody's looking at me. I've got the person who brought me, and the vast majority of our guests, I bet 70% of our guests are there because somebody said, hey, you need to come.
Come to church.
Yep.
yeah, I'm always being introduced to first-time people, which is different from first-time people coming up, and saying, hey, it's my first time here. I'm always being introduced. In other words, there's always someone going, hey, I want you to meet my friends. I'm here for the first time. This guy's been working with me for the last 3 years. And I'm like, man, that just makes sense. And I think the problem we've got such a wave of attractional ministry models in America today is simply that the back door is just as big as the front door. I mean, you're constantly trying to produce events and come and see, and everyone's coming, but they're going right out because they're a crowd. And I don't think anyone wants to be a crowd.
So you close the back door.
Yep.
Or at least have a very small one.
Slam it shut.
Slam it shut. A church of 9,000, mega church, and a lot of times you picture arenas, full of people and whatnot. But in each of your venues, they don't seat more than, 700, 800, 750.
Yeah, we've got two at 850. They're our two largest, and that's because leaders like it big, most people like it small, we say around here.
After that, our venues go to 350 is about the next highest one. So, yeah, and the Edge, which we're in right now, really only seats about 700, comfortably if we do it. So we haven't built it. And even though this is a brand new campus, we sat down years ago and said, how big is too big? Now, for Larry and I put that number right around 7,000. I think a 7,000 seat auditorium would just be sweet.
Pretty sweet.
But just knowing
I like 5.
that some of us have a bigger L leader. But yeah, leaders like it big, people like it small. We thought, and we try to take our personal, what size rooms have you been in where you just felt like, oh, I'm part of a crowd? And what size still makes it feel like, oh, I can know people in here?
Sure.
And there's not a real hard science on that, but we just realized somewhere around that 1,000 to 1,100 seat auditoriums that we've been in and have gone to, it's like, this is big. You're not going to know people on that side of the room. You're not. And yet we found that in our old sanctuary, or the old building that we were in, about 550 at maxed at. And so we kind of split the difference, and that was where the science part came out of it. And it is. We feel like in that size, everyone is a creature by habit. Sure. They're going to sit in the same area, the same place. You get to know the people. You see the people come and go. There's a familiarity with what's going on. And even though we've only been in here, coming up on 2 years on this campus, we're already packed in a couple services and live. We knew that going in because we didn't want everyone coming into where the live teaching.
Sure.
It's too big. It's a crowd.
Yeah, and part of it is, which is a value of not teaching all the time, we have tons of services.
Right.
So what we've basically decided is that the church should be designed to minister to the people rather than to work well for the staff. So when we came to this new site, which had more seating, almost 50, 60% more total throughout the campus, we kept every single service we had. There wasn't one that was dropped. In fact, there's been one added since we came here. And I have seen so many churches go from bunch of services, building a new building so they can have just one or two. And they say, we want to be family. Well, if you're in a big crowd in the auditorium, you don't feel like a big family, you feel like a big crowd. But the leaders getting to see everybody together, they're kind of like the patriarch, getting to see all the extended family and feeling so good at the big family gathering once a year, totally out of touch that somebody had to, drive all the way from Kentucky to get there.
Sure.
And how hard it is. So we try to make it very easy, very simple. And again, we could build on this site one more sanctuary and actually some more venues. And it could go to about 1,300. That would be the max we're ever allowed to even go on this site.
Wow. Biggest dumb tax you guys have paid?
Next question.
All right, perfect. Mine was, I always tell the same thing. The early years at North Coast where I had my dream and I used the people I had to try to reach the people I wanted to reach. Why in the world would they bring their friends and say, hey, this guy's using me, he'll use you too?
Sure.
So it was, again, not an accommodating, consumeristic, what is it you want, but simply realizing these are sheep that needed a shepherd. And what I thought they were is sheep, dogs who needed to go out and get me some more sheep.
Wow.
That was a huge change. Took me 3 years to wrestle with God to get that one down.
Wow.
I would say there's kind of two that come in play for me. One is, at certain times, especially early on, but I'll still fall into that, is equating giftedness with spirituality. Because I have a gift of teaching, because I have a gift of humor, because it comes very easy for me to get up in front of 9,000 in my video and teach. I'm somehow equating giftedness with spirituality. God must like me. I'm walking with God. I'm blessed because look what I do on the weekends, and nothing could be further from the truth. Giftedness is giftedness. Spirituality is spirituality. And one does not equate to the other by any means. But I think sometimes leadership falls into that trap of because I'm gifted, because I'm in blessed, therefore God must be okay with God. And so that's a trap to fall into with giftedness. I think the other one is something that we continue to flesh out here is calling a crowd a church. It just runs thick in the DNA here that if you want to focus on building a crowd, you focus on the weekends. If you want to build a church, you focus on the week. And we focus on the growth groups. That's what North Coast is about, not the weekends. And really, you understand the weekend is a crowd. The church happens in growth groups. It's why this semester over 90% of our adult attendance is in growth groups. Even at the size we are at, 90% of our adult attendance is meeting in homes, going through the message, the homework that comes with it, all the questions, life on life in the Word of God and with, one another. And that's the church.
That's good.
Larry was clear on that 8.5 years ago. He said, Chris, if you come and we triple in size on the weekend, and it doesn't affect growth groups, we failed. We're not here to draw a crowd. We're here to build a church. Everything we do on the weekend is simply a catalyst for what happens in the homes this week. And that's a dumb tax I think a lot of people still pay.
Wow. Great stuff. Hey, guys, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Welcome.
There it is. Creative Leadership Tour. Cruising in the golf cart, North Coast. Check out more videos.
Subscribe, like, comment. You know what to do. All in the video below, description below, info. Kaboom.
Go to the website, thinkintl.tv.
We'll see you there.
Have we met?
Chris.
Larry.
Oh, I've heard about you.
Yeah.
People say, when are you going to teach? Because I listen to a guy named Larry. And I'm like,
My mom says the same thing, but opposite.